adopted a dog 3 weeks ago, and
Oh, congrats. That's sweet.
she did not come as advertised. She is feral.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm covered in cuts, and our other dog is going insane. So we're trying to negotiate it because she's a love, but she's really pretty impossible.
Hmm.
So hopefully she won't start braying like a donkey, because that's one of her signature moves, is to make incredibly loud distress noises if she feels like she's not getting the attention she deserves.
Oh,
So
poor thing. Hopefully she gets more comfortable and mellows out.
she will. She will. It was just dumb on my part to adopt a new dog in the middle of the semester. But we were like, it'll be fine. What's the worst that can happen?
Here you are.
Rachel, where's your other job?
It is at the Shirley Eustace House, which is in Roxbury.
Oh, so you're a Historic New England?
No, they're an independent organization. They were actually in Spinia way back when it was Spinia and not Historic New England. But that was like in the 30s or 40s. So now it's independent, and I'm the programming coordinator. So it's actually kind of similar to this, except that most of our programs are in person.
Let me know if you ever need interns. Any of you, actually. I coordinate internships for history majors, and they have to have a 3.0 and they have to do 100 hours, and we're working on getting them paid. But if we can't get them paid, we really try to make sure they get positive, really like generative experiences. But
yeah. Margot, remind me the age you're working with.
I'm an associate professor at Salem State.
Okay.
So at undergrad and grad, our grads do, I mean, all of our students actually, they're generally, traditional college age, but we have a pretty significant continuing ed program. And so we have adult learners in both undergrad and grad programs.
Nice.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love that so much.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are like making good money in trades, but kind of are aware that maybe the physical demands of the work might just prohibit them from doing it until they retire, right? Or they watch their dads or their moms, kind of deal with physical issues that just come up from doing really physical labor. And so they come back to be history teachers or, just do history. So it's interesting, but it's also scary because the stakes feel very high. I'm like, I hope that they can get jobs, right? They're investing a lot.
Margot, I think we don't have time now, but let me know later. The MHS in general has a residency fellowship that is aimed at undergrad students who have an interest in going into either kind of library science or public history, with a particular focus on kind of community college level and folks who might be coming back for a second career or who haven't declared a history major or anything. So it's on pause this year, but it'll be back next year. Happy to share more information.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And greetings to those of you who are joining us. We're going to get started in a few minutes, and we're so happy to see you.
Yes, welcome everybody. We'll get started probably in about 3 to 5 minutes once we want to allow some time for other folks to make their way in. Hi, Stacia. Hi, Mike. Thanks for joining us. If you're just coming into the meeting, we're going to wait maybe 2 more minutes before we get started because we still have people who are coming in. All right, everyone, why don't we go ahead and get started? And we'll do our introductions, and as we're doing those, we'll probably see some more people coming in. So thank you for joining us today for this Conversations on the Commons. My name is Rachel Hoyle, and I am the Mass History Alliance's Conversations Coordinator. So the general track of this conversation is going to be, I'll give a brief introduction and talk a little bit about what these conversations are, and then introduce Margot Shea, who's going to be our moderator for this conversation. Then I'll hand it over to Margot. She'll introduce our panelists and we'll go from there. So let's get started. Conversations on the Commons is a project of the Massachusetts History Alliance. So these conversations are just what the word sounds like. They're informal conversations, and you all are invited to participate in the discussion, ask questions, and use the chat. This event is being streamed live on YouTube, and those of you watching there are invited to comment and send questions, which we will monitor to the best of our ability. This actually is the last conversation on the Commons until the fall. So thank you all for joining us today. But if you have any ideas or suggestions for future conversations, please do let us know. You can contact us at commons@masshistoryalliance.org, or you can fill out the survey that will be in the chat after this conversation. So before we start, here's some housekeeping. Once we start the conversation, please do keep your microphones muted until you're called on. This just lowers the background noise for our panelists. This is meant to be an informal conversation, so if you'd like, we do invite you to turn on your video. And please use the chat. We'll send it around after. So start by introducing yourself if you'd like, or add your affiliation if you make a comment. And please ask questions throughout the conversation. Feel free to share links and resources, or let us know if you're experiencing any tech issues. You can let us know if you have something to say by raising your hand, by clicking the participants button at the bottom of the screen. If you're on the phone, just ask to break in. After today's conversation, as I said, there will be a survey in the chat. Feel free to leave us with a survey response that just lets us know what we're doing well, what we can improve on, and what you want to see in the future. So I'd like to thank the MHA's top sponsors, and they are Mass Humanities, the Bennett Rosenberg Family Fund, the State Historical Records Advisory Board, Mike Pataski, and the Dorchester Historical Society. You can find all of our sponsors on the Commons website. We'd also invite you to list your organizations in the Commons directory and to sponsor the Commons if you'd like. As you know, everything costs money. If there's any that you can spare, that helps us to keep these conversations and these resources from the Mass History Alliance going. So now I am going to turn it over to Margot Shea. Margot is a professor at Salem State University. And Margot, if you'd like to say more about yourself, feel free to do so.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you so much for everything that you do to make these conversations possible. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you here. Special thanks to our panelists, Karina Olin, Simbrit Paskins, and Kate Melcher from Revolutionary Spaces, Karina, and Massachusetts Historical Society, Simbrit and Kate. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for coming and sharing your lunch hour with us. I'm very grateful to those of you who have been following the Conversations Convention and just saying hi and letting us know where you're zooming in from in the chat. We really appreciate it, and it helps build community. So thank you. And if you haven't done so yet, if you have a second, please go ahead and let us know where you're coming from. So I am a volunteer on the communications committee of the MHA. I'm a former board member. I'd like to take a moment just to make a plug for committee volunteer gigs. Not all of us have the time or the resources to become board members. The committee system allows anybody from any organization or an individual in the Commonwealth to join a Mass History Alliance committee. The commitment is about 4 to 5 hours a month, and it really enables us to bring vibrancy and buoyancy and a kind of sense of what's possible to the work that the MHA is doing. All of you know that the MHA is volunteer run, it's volunteer driven, and the organizing principle of this organization is members and stakeholders and affiliates helping each other, right? The goal is to be democratic. The goal is to be kind of non-hierarchical. And the more folks that we have involved, the better we are able to work towards achieving that goal. So this conversation today has come about because of many conversations that we've had at conferences, at other conversations on the Commons, amongst ourselves, about this kind of, now long-standing idea that history and engagement in history and heritage and museums tends to really draw older kind of stakeholders, audiences, partners, right? And we know from our work that young people are involved, and we know that young people are perhaps more committed or invested than ever in making connections between past, present, and future. And so today's conversation is really designed to bring experts who are working with young people in different capacities to share their knowledge, their experience, and their wisdom with all of us, and to get the conversation going. So we sort of twist it, right? Let's change the paradigm. Let's change the narrative. Let's not kind of, clasp our hands together and say, oh, woe is us. History is, for the old, but really let's focus our energies and attention on where young people want to be met, where their excitement, enthusiasm, and sense of agency meets the heritage and museums and history kind of professions and fields and areas of inquiry, and really get us motivated and excited to do this work. So in order to do that, I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce our panelists. We have decided that our panelists are going to speak for a few minutes around some guiding questions. And then we're really just going to open it up, not only to questions, but also to observations, to responses and feedback, to what our panelists share, to the work that you're doing, models of best practices and things that you think are really exciting. And hopefully we'll be able to leave this conversation today kind of dedicating ourselves to the work of engaging in authentic, real ways with young people. So to that end, I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'm going to introduce them all at the beginning, and then we'll turn it over to them. So our first panelist is going to be Karina Olin. Karina uses she, her pronouns. She's the education coordinator at Revolutionary Spaces. That's the organization, if you don't know, that stewards the old State House and the Old South Meeting House in historic downtown Boston. Karina oversees outreach and coordination of school groups and helps facilitate execution and development of new educational programs across the historic sites. Karina holds a bachelor's degree in history from Emmanuel College in Boston and an MA in museum studies from University College Cork in Ireland. So welcome, Karina. We are so happy to have you. And as soon as I introduce Kate and Simbrit, I'm going to turn it over to you. So Kate Melcher is Assistant Director of Education at the Mass Historical Society, as well as State Affiliate Coordinator of National History Day in Massachusetts. As an Austria 2012 Fulbright and during an MA at the University of Bristol in England, Melcher performed research in fields of monuments and public memory. Day to day at the MHS, she programs teacher workshops, supports student and teacher fellows, develops primary source curriculum materials, and coordinates National History Day. Simbrit Paskins is a queer Black bilingual woman of West Indian and Black American descent who was raised and currently resides in Western Mass. Western Mass! Simbrit contributes to her communities as a passionate educator, animal lover, pet mama of 3, organizer, activist, and creative artist. With a BA in Ethnic and Gender Studies and Spanish, Simbrit is the Student Programs Coordinator at the Mass Historical Society and the State Coordinator for National History Day in Massachusetts. Thank you all so much for being here, and let's get this conversation started. Karina, let me turn it over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this. I've never been on a panel for a conversation on the Commons before, so this is exciting for me. Basically, I'm going to talk a little bit about just like one part of student engagement that we do, because like Kate and Simbrit, I'm sure there's like a million things to talk about, but this is something it's one of our newest programs. It's one of the more updated and kind of fun and interesting and different. So I'm going to talk about our new program, Revolution is Brewing, and how we're using that to engage students. Students grades 8 through 12 plus. And this is something kind of new and different for us, for these two organizations, because traditionally, at least at the Old South Meeting House, programming tends to focus on grades 3 through 5. So this was a purposeful attempt to try and reach those students grades like 7, 8, 9, and then we ended up falling into grades 8 through 12. But this program, Revolution is Brewing, it's a 90-minute immersive role-playing game or program. And basically what it is it's a digital immersive experience where students take on the roles of characters from 1774, just after news of the coercive acts hits Boston. And thank you. Just after the news hits Boston. And so what they're doing is they're stepping into these roles. They're taking on personas of historical people. Some of these characters are composites of a couple different real people. Some of them are pretty straightforward. You know exactly who they are, but none of the characters have names, and that's on purpose. The whole kind of point of this game is for students to be able to explore new perspectives, to try and understand history from a point of view that they might not have before heard or might not have thought even existed. For example, the type of social history that we talk about with younger students tends to focus on this idea that there's two groups of patriots and loyalists, and that, you know, they were separate, they were always separate, they were not friends, they were enemies. These kind of like nameless, faceless groups, and the names and faces that do go along with those groups are pretty binary. They don't include a lot of diversity. So I think students tend to have some trouble seeing themselves in those people a lot of the time, especially these like founding fathers who we often see as just being so above that it can be hard to identify with them, at least for me personally, and I think students feel that way a lot too. But in this way, they're able to explore the perspectives of the everyday person who was living in Boston and dealing with the effects of the Boston Tea Party, the coercive acts. And really, it helps them understand how the past connects to them. I think one of the challenges that I see in these museums is getting students to a place where they're able to see themselves as a part of this history. And it can be very difficult because those like heavy hitters, those names and faces that we see all the time are, again, pretty binary, and they don't always see themselves in those people. So this is a way of getting them to see those perspectives, at least. So where they were thinking there were only patriots and loyalists, in this game, maybe they're playing a conservative, which would, you know, be a loyalist. They play a radical, which would be a patriot. They play a moderate, which sometimes confuses them. And I think they don't realize, because we don't really talk about it at younger ages, this idea that people in Boston in 1774, 1773, a lot of them were moderates. This idea that people were just everyday people. They were confused, they were scared. There was history happening all around them, and they were having to grapple with that. And I think that's something that students are facing today. We're all sort of facing today. I feel like more than ever, it feels like history is happening around us all the time. And that was true years ago, but it feels more true now than ever. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on students. They're dealing with a lot. And I think this offers them an opportunity to understand more about what's happening around them, hearing stories of people who were neighbors, who were friends, who were family members, who were on different sides of the political spectrum, and having these debates, people who agreed with each other about what the end result should be, but maybe not the methods to get there, I think is a really important one. And so it's basically just an opportunity for them to explore new perspectives. It's really a program about empathy at the end of the day. You know, at its simplest, this program is a opportunity to hit those curriculum goals, learn about the coercive acts, something that can be kind of difficult. But on a deeper level, it's a practice in empathy building, in understanding perspectives, and I think like social learning as well. I think a lot of these students didn't have a lot of social interaction in the last couple of years. And so getting them all together to sit in groups and really discuss with each other in a space that is important as well. Give them an opportunity to kind of claim a space that can feel really intimidating. That's a large part of it as well. This game lends itself to certain learning opportunities, but it also is really important for place-based learning, which we talk about a lot. This idea that, you know, you walk into the Old South Meeting House, for anyone who's been there, and it can feel intimidating. I think it presents as a church right away. And so people they get their hushed tones, they become very quiet, and they get nervous. It's a big room. So I don't think they feel like they can really spread out. You know, we'll say you can sit in the pews, but people get a little bit nervous to do that. And this game, we're not really directing, we're just facilitating their learning. So we would say, I want everybody to go over to this pew here. So they're given an opportunity to gather and discuss and debate with each other. And I think that's really important too, especially for building those relationships with Boston schools and Boston students. Many Boston students that I talk to have never been to these sites before. They didn't know they could come in. They don't know that much about them. And I think that's a shame because, you know, these are nationally historic buildings, but they're also local history for students in Boston. These are their local history museums. And so I think it's important that they feel connected to these places. And so making them less intimidating, I think, is a big part of the job. And programs like this, like Revolution is Brewing, where they take on characters, where they're allowed to play and learn at the same time, where they can explore a space that might have felt intimidating when they walk into, I think helps them better understand that these spaces are their own, as well as gives them an opportunity to understand those perspectives. That, like, big challenging part for us is making this history feel like something that should be important to them, answering those, like, why should I care about this? What does this have to do with me? I don't even like that guy kind of questions that I do hear from students. I think giving them a character, giving them an opportunity to step into something that is so separate from themselves sometimes, can help them make the connections between what they feel in their own time. So maybe if they can't see themselves in historical figures, they can understand those feelings of that time. Yeah, I think I can talk for days about the place-based learning, but does anyone any questions or anything?
That was amazing. Thank you. Like, I've already taken tons of notes, and I think that everyone is going to really resonate with the idea of helping students claim spaces that may feel intimidating, claim these spaces as their spaces, claim these feelings and emotions, and the confusion and the sense of both possibility and, like, frankly, terror that accompanies this historical moment as being something they can relate to. And, you know, that you kind of separate the names and the faces and focus on the experiences and the vast striations of gray between the black and white. So I think that you've given us all tons to think about, and let's hear from Simbritt and Kate, and then we'll open it up for conversation. Karina, thank you so much. All right. All right, so I know that Kate and Simbritt are going to tag team this. They are in different corners of the Commonwealth, and so they're each on their own Zoom screens, but I'm going to turn it over to them, and they're going to kind of have a bit of a back and forth conversation with us about their work and about kind of what they're seeing and what they're learning about young people's investments in the past. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Margot, and thank you, Karina. I'm so excited for this conversation. Margot, do me a favor. We tried to put out some notes based on your incredible prompts and realized that we could also probably talk for the full hour. So if you can give us kind of a time heads up if it starts to go on a bit long, that would be great. Thank you again for the earlier introduction. I'm Kate Melchior. I'm the Assistant Director of Education at the MHS, and I've been there about 5.5 years. And like you said, we have all of these different programs here. I would love for folks to kind of get in touch and check out all of the different things that we have. Karina, so much of what you said about making your physical spaces feel welcome is really, really pertinent to a lot of what we're doing. But for National History Day, which we want to kind of focus on today, a lot of that is actually taking place out in communities and in the schools themselves. And we're excited to share a little bit more about this program. So for those of you who haven't heard of it, National History Day, or NHD, guides students in grades 6 through 12 through a year of historical research and inquiry, interpretation, and creative expression. It's a really silly name because it doesn't actually take place in a day, but after 40 or 50 years, I guess it's too late to change. Basically, students get to pick out and then create a project on any topic in history they're interested in. This can be local history, it can be world history, it can be any different time period. And then they spend close to a year diving deeper and deeper into this topic, refining the project, and then presenting it in their classroom, at a school level, in the community, and some of them at our competitions in the state and nationally. I'll hand it over to Sim to talk a bit more about that.
Yes, I'm really excited to be here. I feel great energy and really excited to have heard Karina talk about the work that they're doing. First, my name is Simbritt. Folks can call me Sim if you'd like. So let's talk about National History Day and these projects. Students can develop, they can choose one sort of project category to develop their project. They can create a documentary, a website, they can write a paper or an essay, they can develop a skit and a script and perform a performance, or they can create an exhibit. So there are really 5 mediums that students have to choose from for their History Day project. And we really feel excited about watching students engage in independent project-based learning. Students are learning how to research and find primary sources, creating arguments about history on both sides of the coin and that in-between space that Karina was talking about, and really becoming experts on the topic. One of our favorite things is that students are the experts in the room in their History Day projects. And so some students compete in the competitions in the spring. In Massachusetts, we just wrapped up our regional contest and our state contest, but the competition really isn't the most important aspect of the program, even if it's the part that gets the most attention. Kate and I, in prepping for this conversation, thought it would be really cool to share some titles of student projects that jumped out at us. So I'll just read them rapid fire. One was called How Video Game Consoles Revolutionized Family Entertainment. So cool. The Aboriginal Rights Movement. Another was titled Frontiers in Nigerian Independence, the Women's War of 1929. Another is titled Marsha P. Johnson, Leader in a New Frontier of Inclusivity in the LGBTQ plus rights movement. And the last one we chose was Corazon Aquino, the Filipino Mother of Democracy. So we hope that those titles would give you an idea of the breadth of the programs or the projects, that students are tackling. And there's so many more. Over 500 students participated in our local contest this year. I'll pass it to Kate to talk about some of the ways that we engage students and some successes we've seen.
Thank you so much, Sim. We had so much trouble choosing which topics to pick just for those names. So one of the questions that Margot shared with us were, what are some of the ways that we see students engaging with history, and what are some of the successes that we're seeing? So one of the things we observe through our program is that when given the space to choose and to do self-directed learning, one of the things that students do is they choose project topics closely connected to things like, for example, personal or family histories. We had one incredible project last year where a student interviewed her grandmother, who is an activist in the civil rights movement, and kind of rooted her project in that story. We see students picking topics that let them explore their own identities or identities as they exist in their communities. We see students exploring a specific area of interest, such as, say, doing something on the history of anime, which is something I love because everything that we do has a history. This lets them really dive into that. We see students picking topics that are outside of their own experience as well, or outside of what they've learned about in the school space. A lot of things that are not typical in the curriculum you hear covered, like in the examples we just talked about. And we see them picking projects formats that allow them to be really creative in an area that interests them there as well. So do they like film? Do they like web building? Are they interested in performance? Do they enjoy doing art or writing? There are all of these different avenues that let them really show off the things that they love and get to dive into that through the lens of history.
I wanted to talk about the multiple points of entry with the History Day project. Before working with the MHS, taught high school in Holyoke High, 10th and 11th grade munchkins. And so it was really important to figure out like how students can engage from multiple points in the work that they're doing. And this happens with History Day, right? So students have tons of opportunities to be engaged as learners because they can choose their presentation format. This allows them to have autonomy in their learning and really highlight their strengths. And one of the things we were like, we have to tell them about this thing was a student this year who created a shaker cabinet literally from scratch and used that as a way to connect their interests in like building furniture with the historical research that they were doing on shaker furniture in America. Super cool. So they brought this like huge piece of furniture into the contest day arena, I should say. Also, the work around History Day is flexible enough to be scaffolded. So for educators in the room and like using that language around how do we make sure that different learners have access to the work, special education students, students learning English, younger learners, etc., can tap into the History Day project. For example, one of our students going to nationals this year is from the Landmark School in Eastern Mass. So really exciting developments on that front.
I should mention, for those who aren't familiar, the Landmark is a school that specializes in supporting students with dyslexia and other reading-based learning disabilities. So they're headed to nationals. They did a wonderful job.
Yeah.
So we could talk forever about all of the different things that you learn through History Day, but one of the things I love hearing from students are some of the things that they learn that aren't just history content, because as I think most of us in the room know, the content is only this one small piece of what we're all doing. So students through this program are empowered to go talk to people outside of their schools, like hopefully some of the people in this room. We at the MHS often get emails from student researchers. We have kids who are using archives. They go and get oral histories. We have this one incredible story of a student who ended up reaching out to a webmaster who had a website about Navajo code talkers, and he ended up putting his grandfather on the phone, who is one of the last code talkers who is still alive, and they just, spoke for a half hour together. So all of these really incredible experiences that really build confidence in the validity of what the kids themselves are doing and their work as a historian. It also builds all of the skills we all talk about, like media literacy, public speaking, thinking critically about historical complexity, like what Karina was talking about, those gray spaces. And then also some of the things like group work and time management. I have some students who are going off into doing the sciences who said, you know what, I feel a lot more prepared to manage a long-term project than I would have otherwise. So lots of different things that come out of this, a lot of successes that we see and hear about from the kids. And talk about some of the challenges, though, which there are also plenty of. I'll turn this back over to Sim.
Yeah. So like history is hard work, right? Getting access to it, depending on your positionality in the world, understanding it. And then if you're in a space of educating, teaching that back. If students are the experts in the room in this space with the History Day project, it was important for us to sort of identify like what are some of the challenges and what are some solutions that we are exploring and constantly having conversations about at the MHS. So one of the highlights, I should mention that this is my first year with History Day. So I'm coming at this from with really new eyes. What I noticed this year is that teacher involvement is like a really powerful tool in steering the History Day project. We could not do this without our teachers that are involved in this work, but it's a huge undertaking and can be really hard to do when teachers have a full workload on top of coordinating History Day work with their students. So at the MHS, we're always working to develop more supportive planning materials and resources, and just kind of wanted to name a few supports here in this space with you all that might be interesting to other community organizations who may want to get involved. Shameless plug. So one solution that we've been thinking about is how do we engage other community folks who have touch points with young people in our communities? Think of like youth-centered nonprofits, other community organizations, staff at other historical organizations. So lots of folks on this call. Also like non-core class teachers. So how can a gym teacher support a History Day project? This is a real connection that could be made and has been made. How could an art teacher or a dance teacher support these projects if a student is choosing a performance category, for example? What are the ways in which cultural and community orgs can support students in the research, the civics, and other projects in relation to National History Day?
To build upon this, right? I mean, this is a challenge for all teachers, but one of the things that we are really focusing on right now, especially as we've been able to grow our own capacity in our department, is thinking about how to really expand the reach of our program and the involvement of particularly under-resourced and alternative learning schools. Currently, a lot of our participating schools, they're from well-resourced districts, they're from private schools. We do have great examples of successes outside of that paradigm, but we're really working on focusing on developing resources to support schools more broadly that don't have those scaffolds. What does it look like to bring this program to a school that doesn't have those resources necessarily and make the connections for them so this is possible and for a long-lasting program?
And the last sort of challenge that we wanted to name was that students are often grappling with uncovering difficult history. Like a lot of them are learning this as they jump into their projects for the year. So we're working on supporting them in that, particularly how to present colonial and counter-colonial narratives while avoiding appropriation. Like if a student wants to do a project on Native American history, how do they do that without stepping into spaces that would be problematic in their presentation? So one solution is working with students to help them identify their positionality in relation to these topics, and then encouraging and advising them to connect with research and people in the communities they're looking to tell the stories of. So how do they do that with care? How do you find the information and then tell the story with care and with respect to the community you're representing? And the goal really is like, yes, to avoid appropriation and passivity in history telling, but it's also to encourage truth telling. Like that is at the heart of the work that the History Day projects get to do or invite young people to do. And this gets to be a tool for youth empowerment. So when the young people feel connected to the work that they're doing, similarly to what Karina was talking about, it becomes easier for them to engage in it on a regular basis and to return back to it later.
So I feel like so many times when you look at the projects that we're seeing from these kids, we're seeing a lot of truth telling. They, like Karina was saying and Margot was saying, this is something they want to be engaged in. And when given the opportunity to pick something that they're passionate about, they run with it. What they do is just astounding every year. So to close this out, because like I said, we've probably talked for a while, but Margot had also asked if we had any, lessons to be learned or wisdom to share, and which is a little strange to think about, but we did have a few ideas. One of the things that I think might be relevant to a lot of folks in this room. What Karina said is very true. A lot of what I see of these strong community historical society partnerships are with schools at an elementary level in the local schools. You're part of that yearly field trip in third grade or something like that. That's not to say it's the case with everyone. I know that people in this room can talk about some other really great programs with the upper levels. But I think something we've learned through History Day is that middle and high school teachers are really looking for those partnerships. And if somebody brings it to them, they will be happy to take it and run with it. We have some schools that have developed these great reciprocal relationship with local organizations, helping the students to do archival research, introducing them to a library. How do you search for something? Talking to them about local history and civics, judging and giving feedback on projects, or hosting a student presentation at the end of the year. It's also a huge boon for the organizations because you end up then bringing the community into your spaces and developing really long-lasting relationships with these kids. The Hingham Historical Society, for example, has a number of interns who have come from those high school pools. Just to name a few ways that we worked with some organizations to partner through History Day, in addition to connecting folks with local schools, partner organizations will create online resource pages for student researchers. They'll offer special prizes to kids at our competitions. They'll make it easy for folks to contact them. Do you have a virtual chat or a clear email on your page so that if a student wants to use your materials, they can reach out? And I will say this, I was quite proud of this. Accessible sources are usable sources. The sources that you have in your collections are marvelous, but if there's no way for a student to know that they're there or to look at them, if there's nothing available online or nothing to tell them what's there, they're not going to come. And so in this vein, I'm going to put in a really quick and kind of shameless plug for one of the other projects that we've been working on at MHS. And this is part of National History Day to help kids launch their projects, but it's also more broadly helping teachers to connect with and use our resources. We've developed a source called thehistorysource.org. And it is a place where you can find primary source sets with all sorts of associated materials, vocabulary list, background historical context, which can be really helpful, digitized version of materials, teacher resources, and much more. So this is something that's, fairly involved, but it's an example of some of the ways we've been trying to make our materials more accessible to these kids. And last but not least, I will turn it over to Tim to talk about some of our last ideas with us.
Yeah, we thought it was important to we've mentioned it, but just naming that there's power in giving students the opportunity to choose. So student choice. In this case, they get to choose the specific focus of their project. They're provided with a theme across the board, but they're able to choose their specific projects. And that feels really important to how they engage with the work. Also recognizing that students are the experts in the room. And that's not just fluffy language that we throw around. It really is centered on them and what they've had the time to learn about in the space that they've had to create their projects. So when we're doing, for example, our judges orientation, which is a collection of humans from the community that literally volunteer their time to judge for the day, we're having that conversation with them. You may be really familiar with XYZ topic, but in this space, they're teaching you. And so what does that look like, feel like, sound like? And then lastly, celebrating and highlighting their work in the community. We really want to center joy and again, celebration for the work that the students are creating so that it doesn't feel yes, it's a History Day contest. There's a regional and there's a state and there's a national contest and there are medals and there are certificates, but that's not at the heart of the work that they're doing. We want them to feel connected to the history and to the learning. And we see that happen consistently. I'll pass it to Kate for our last sort of hurrah.
Well, I think, thank you for listening to us. As you can probably tell, we love the program. We're really excited for your questions and just grateful to be in a space with other people who care about this. So thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Karina, I just wanted to pass the mic back over to you for just a second to see if Sim and Kate's comments just kind of brought up any issues for you, especially in terms of things you've learned or just kind of ideas to share, wisdom that you've picked up along the way.
Yeah, I was sort of commenting along the way while you were talking because it was amazing to hear about all the work that you're both doing. I think this idea that students are sort of taking charge of their own learning is really important, especially for older students. At the end, you were talking about that ownership, and I think that is really relevant in our spaces as well. I think a really big theme is understanding that students are competent, that you're understanding that students are human beings, they're real, they can do their own work and their own research, and they are passionate about things, and they don't need to be told to be passionate about those things, they just are. And so allowing them opportunities, facilitating that learning, guiding them to opportunities that allow them to explore the things that they're passionate about, I think is really important. Just understanding that they're all capable and curious and excited to do this history. I think the thing that I would say is like my big theme for the year, and I guess the piece of advice I would have for anybody who's looking to create programs like ours. I don't know if Kate and Simbrit, you also did this, but a big part of our initiatives for this year are focusing on Boston Public Schools, trying to get those students into these spaces as much as possible. Because we don't see them that much, which is interesting because, again, these are their museums. And I think it's been really difficult in the past couple of years because I know Kate or Simbrit, one of you mentioned this, the workload of teachers is like astronomical. And it's totally understandable that they wouldn't want to like drive to downtown Boston after school to, chat about potential programs with us. So finding ways to make that accessible, and I don't think I have, or we have by any means, perfected that. I think we're still sort of looking for avenues to reach those audiences. But I think the thing that's working for us at this point in time is one-on-one, reaching out to people, chatting with teachers one-on-one, asking them what they're looking for, seeing if there's any way we could help, if there's parts of curriculum that are missing. I know, Margot, you had said the third grade curriculum, they put the history in there. We tend to see third graders, fifth graders, eighth graders. And then with the new Action Civics program, we sometimes see ninth or 12th graders, but it is pretty, rigid in that sense. And I think if we can help lessen the load in any way by reaching out one-on-one, that's what's been most effective, at least from my perspective, just talking to teachers, any educators as well.
Thank you. That's super helpful. So Mike Pataski asked a question about primary sources written in cursive, and Kate responded to that by saying, transcriptions make a huge difference in terms of the accessibility. Kate's point about accessibility equals usability cannot be underscored, and I think that's a really good example, not just for young people who may not be learning to read or write in cursive, but I think for lots of kind of folks that do history out of love, not because it's a job they get paid to do. So please post your questions in the chat, or raise your hand, or just empower yourself to unmute yourselves. Observations, reactions, things that really hit home for you, things you want to know more about.
Can I speak to, while we wait for folks to think, sort of collect their thoughts and present their questions, something that Karina which you were just talking about, made me think about a conversation that Kate and I were having, and that we're having at the MHS and the education department around like humanizing history. It's something we named as we were thinking about like, oh my gosh, what do we share with this audience in X amount of minutes? But like making it real for folks, and how do we fill the gap if teachers' workload is overloaded and students have got a ton going on, including testing that they can't necessarily opt out of in many cases. Like, how do we fill those gaps? And that's where the conversation has sort of been living around what other people exist in the community that help to like stimulate the community, who can step into these spaces to support and strengthen those resources. So for example, our students are in school for 8 hours a day. And then after school, if they're not going directly home, they're participating in a club that takes a teacher advisor or another community advisor, who are people that are running community centers or other, again, like youth-centered organizations who have strong relationships, not only with the students, because you specifically mentioned like Boston Public Schools, right? So not only like with the students, but with their families, because when the students are done working with us, they've got to go home to those families. And so if these other agencies and organizations have strong positive relationships with these families, could we as institutions, organizations, build relationships with those other adults in the space? I usually just group them all together as like caring adults, because that's who they are, right? Like we love the work and we love the students, and we don't just come back every day because of our paycheck. And so that has been a conversation that we're having, is like, how can we fill the gap what are people that have positive relationships with the families that we're trying to engage with, and use those relationships as a tool as well, because they're sort of experts in their own area. You know what I mean? Like what the staff at the Boys and Girls Club down the road knows about these kids and their families may be very different than what the teacher in the classroom knows. And that's a really important sort of tool that we have at our disposal.
Hi, I'm Mary Larkin, and I am a teacher in Westford Public Schools. I'm really excited. I'm going to be able to take a small group of kids to Revolution is Brewing in May, and I can't wait. I had a couple of comments and then a question about something that I think definitely comes up, because I love the museum world and the teaching world equally in some ways. Sometimes I love museums more. It is very difficult for teachers to get kids out of buildings. And it's not because we don't want to do it. It's because nobody else wants us to do it. There's liability issues, the transportation costs. We can't find bus drivers. How many kids can you host? So for example, in my school, I have 215 eighth graders, and I know Revolution is Brewing can only take 40 at a time. So we can't, on a normal day, just say, well, these 40 kids are going to go, but nobody else can. And we also can't take 40 kids on 6 separate days to do the, you know what I'm saying? So that's a roadblock that I know that you probably can't do a lot about either, but if you're kind of wondering where those gaps are, that's a big challenge. Even in a wealthy school district like Westford, getting the money to take these kids on the bus. And the only reason I'm allowed to do it is because they're the kids who've chosen not to go on the very expensive Washington, D.C. 3-day trip. And I'm using it. Like I'm excited. So that's kind of that. And the other thing about that too, is that sometimes I feel there's a disconnect between museum programming and the curriculum standards. Even though I would love to take kids to do anything in a museum, I'm not going to be allowed to do it unless I write a proposal that justifies it with the direct connection to what they are learning at the grade level. And that's very frustrating for the teachers, because we know that real learning and real experience and getting out is more memorable than us talking at them. But that's how we are governed. And I can imagine, I don't work for Boston Public Schools, but I can imagine that's a big stumbling block for teachers there too. For National History Day, I have known about and loved this program for years. I wanted to ask, do you find that most schools do this as a club? Is it like an extra credit track? Is it in the curriculum? How do schools manage this activity? Like, where do they put it in your experience?
Here, I'll jump on this because I've been doing it for a number of years, and the answer is yes to pretty much all of them. We have, all right, so my favorite situation, it's a little bit of the like, you love it when it happens, but it's hard to get there, is when an entire grade level does it. Because then the teacher, you have it as your end of year, it's your midterm assignment, end of year assignment. It's built into the curriculum where you're doing it a bit at a time. And it's pretty much, there's some teachers who will use it to cover content. They'll say, okay, I'm going to have kids do projects based on the second half of our year, and then they're going to help teach the second half of the year. So they do constrain a little bit the topic choice. I have other teachers who say, you know what, this is going to be it covers the entire skill-based section of the curriculum standards. So we're going to do this, but it'll be alongside our other materials. And that's great, I think, because the teachers are able to support each other, and having that network is so wonderful. And it's something we're trying to work on, seeing how we can build between schools when that's not possible. But we also see incredible programs as after school programs where they're meeting. This is, like Sim said, it's kind of the equivalent of what you're doing for art or what you're doing for sports. I have individual students who will participate. We have homeschool students or students who have aged out of their school program, but they still want to continue. And we do see a lot of, right now, the kind of gifted and talented or honors students doing this. But honestly, some of my favorite work comes comes when it's not in those spaces. So we have special education classes who will do this, and we will work with folks to adopt or adapt the project. You know, you can say, I'm going to do a different theme for the year. I'm going to have the kids look at civic projects. I'm going to have, in one 6th grade class, they voted on their favorite 4 topics and then got to pick between them, so that the teacher didn't have to try and help them find resources on 25 different subjects. There's a lot of flexibility, and it takes a bit of work to get it set up and rolling that first year. And so that's what we hope we can help with, is to make that a little easier.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Also, while the next person speaks, I just also want to shout out Mary. Thank you so much. All of the things that you're raising are so key. I really miss the little yellow bus grants that used to go out, because it's not available anymore, because buses is like one of the worst parts of. So thank you for naming all of those issues.
Yes, the bus funding is, I think, probably something we run into the most. And then accessibility to the physical buildings is really difficult. The Old South Meeting House is accessible, but the Old State House is not. And that it is painful. It's like, it hurts to have happen, because I want students to be able to access this space as much as possible, and to sometimes have to say they physically can't access it is really hard. It's the nature of like an 18th century building in the middle of downtown Boston with no space around it. So I think, you know, there is a long-term plan to sort of fix that eventually, but it's museum time. So it's sort of in the future. But until then, I think we try and make the programs as accessible as possible. Like Revolution is Brewing, of course, is great to do in the space, because we love place-based learning, but you can do the program in your classroom. It's almost the exact same. Sometimes it works a little bit better for some students. So it can be a nice opportunity to do that. And then hitting those curriculum goals as well. We try and pinpoint which ones specifically that we're hitting with programs. So because we know that teachers have to sort of advocate for the trips themselves. So we'll try and do that even more in the future.
Mattapoisett.
Yep, I just wanted to talk about a project that we recently did. We started a huge transcription project about 1.5 years ago, where we've been getting high schoolers to come in and transcribe journals for us. And the challenge has been, you know, obviously them reading cursive and all of that stuff. But one of the 5th grade English teachers created a project for her students where she had them write short journal entries about their firsthand experiences with COVID. And the students could either do an oral history, they could, you know, write something about what happened to them. Some of them interviewed their parents who were nurses and doctors, and she compiled all of these journal entries into a binder with, you know, information about when they first returned to school, you know, PowerPoint slides from when they were doing school at home, and she presented it to the museum. And it tied perfectly into our journal transcription project, because we do have journals from the 1918 flu pandemic. We have a journal from a doctor from 1870 who talks about a diphtheria outbreak in town. I couldn't bring a lot of the actual materials to the school because of how fragile they are, but I was able to scan some of the pages and bring diaries specifically from 1918 that talked about the Spanish flu. And the kids were just so delighted to make that connection with something that they lived through, and that's something that happened over 100 years ago. And it was, you know, they have those little projector things where I don't know what they're called, but you can put something underneath it and it projects it to a screen. So they could actually see, you know, this woman, Harriet, writing about all the people who had died from the Spanish flu. And it really connected history for them. And, you know, and now we have their firsthand materials from their experiences going through COVID. in our museum collection now. So hopefully, in 50, 100 years, people will be able to look back on their firsthand experiences and learn from that. So I just wanted to tell you about that because it was so amazing.
I thank you for sharing. It's really cool to hear that a teacher really like took that idea and made it happen for the students and gave them an opportunity to sort of like center and also process their experience in a way that a lot of students to this day maybe still haven't had an opportunity to do. A lot of humans haven't had an opportunity to do. And it made me think about one of the class visits that happened at the MHS back when I first joined and was just sort of like brand new to the space itself. As far as our conversation around like familiarity with the space, Kate and another one of our colleagues, Heather, asked the student group, like, if you were going to have something of yours that would be like gifted to the archives of Massachusetts, what would it be? And so that was a really cool conversation to have with the students about like what things in their lives exist right now that feel like important. And of course, like journals and diaries were a part of that. Students were like hairbrushes, and like one kid was like, I have this old clock in my in my house, and I wonder if my mom would like let me gift this thing. And so it was really cool to get them to start thinking about that. But what I'm hearing across like everyone sharing is just that students are at the center of their connection to history, that like their existence and what they speak and write and learn about and then teach back is at the center of their relationship with history. And that feels really true as far like that feels like if that's at the forefront of how we continue to move forward in each of our organizations, then we really get some really strong work done as far as getting students engaged and keeping them engaged if they feel like there's this constant connection to it. And I always say that when I was teaching and in this role, like sometimes adults are the hardest part of the job because the students are ready to go. Karina, you mentioned it earlier, like students don't need to be told, like they already know, they just need space and opportunity to engage in that way. So yeah, just some reflections as folks are sharing.
I want to honor everyone's time. So we're at 1:04. I just want to say that this conversation has been really transformative for my thinking. I think that we get stuck in transactional models where it's about bringing people through the door or, like being able to count participants or, identify participation. And this conversation, just to amplify Sim's last comment, it's centering students as experts. It's acknowledging their passion, their interest, and providing them with resources. And I think one of the things that I really heard from everyone, including those of you in the room, is that we really need to frame these opportunities as opportunities for learning and living in our world today. And if we begin from that point and we honor that point, then I think we can really move forward with programming that is important enough and meaningful enough that we can not only engage and be true to young people's potential and where they stand, but we can also make really strong arguments about why this work needs to be funded and needs to be supported and needs to be amplified and celebrated everywhere. This is literally not just the present, but also the future. And I am so grateful to all of you, to our speakers and to our participants who really kind of gave us this very clear vision of what we're doing and why it matters. So thank you so much. We've got there's some links in the chat, especially to MHS, and feel free to get in touch with us. And I'm sure that Kate and Karina and Simbrit would be happy for you to reach out to them via email if you want to follow up. So thanks everyone for coming, and special thanks to our amazing panel of speakers. Thank you. If you celebrate, then have a meaningful holiday weekend, and I hope to see you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks to our hosts as well. This has been a wonderful experience.
Agreed.